Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. Welcome to this very special episode of the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. What's so special about it? Well, first of all, thanks for listening. That makes it special. But more particularly, this is a Christmas episode. What makes it a Christmas episode? I don't hear sleigh bells. I don't hear carols being sung. Well, we'll get to the Christmas aspect of the podcast and why I've done this kind of Christmassy themed thing a number of years here in a moment. But I have two fun administrative details to point out first. And the first one is that next week, the 320th episode, is going to be another accusations edition of the podcast. What is that? Well, this is an opportunity for me to interact with what you have to say. So if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have accusations about anything fly fishing related, but more particularly anything that I've talked about on the podcast or that I've written about on the website, this is your opportunity to send that feedback to me, Matthew at castingacross.com, and I will gladly interact with it. Now, I don't take every email or social media chirp or whatever and put it on the air, but I take 3 or 4 of them and I interact with them in that format. But if you do reach out, and even if you don't make the podcast, then I will do my darndest to get back to you. Every once in a while, something slips through. I read it on my phone. It's not marked. It's marked as unread, or it's marked as read on Outlook, and then you know how that works. You get email. But anyway, send me that question, comment, or that accusation, Matthew at castingacross.com, and next week it may make it into the podcast episode. The second thing I want to share is really exciting in my perspective, and that's that I am presenting at this year's Marlboro stop of the Fly Fishing Show. There is also, I think, plans for me to present in Edison, New Jersey in January. But right now, Marlboro is definitely in pen, in ink, digitally on the internet. So let me give a rundown of what those presentations are. So just as a bit of a preface for this. The Fly Fishing Show, if you don't know, it happens 7 or 8 places around the country in January, February, and March. Kicks off in Marlboro, Mass., ends up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but goes all the way to the West Coast and back again. And what a lot of people think about when they think about the Fly Fishing Show is walking through the halls and looking at the vendors. And although that is a great part of the Fly Fishing Show, and I am certainly a fan of that, where you really get your value and you really can take something home with you that's going to make a significant impact. As great as a new fly rod or a new box of flies is, going to the presentations is where it's at, in my humble opinion. And there's a number of presentation styles. There's casting demonstrations, there's tying demos, there are skill-based presentations, but then there's also some paid ones as well. But the vast majority of them are free. And what I'll be doing is one of those free presentations that is lumped into what's called the Destination Theater. So a lot of the folks that are presenting in the same rooms as me are guides and lodges and stuff like that. But I am going to be presenting twice. Once is on Friday, January 17th at noon, and that's presentation is called Translating Small Stream Skills to Big Water. Translating Small Stream Skills to Big Water. You may have heard me talk about this in brief on the podcast or some articles I've written about this topic, but this will give me 45 minutes to an hour to explore this fully. And what it essentially is that if you have the skills and the confidence to fish your little mountain creek or your little stream, then you have everything you need, every tool in your box already to go out and fish big water. Doesn't mean that you don't have room to learn and room to grow, but you have everything that it takes. And so I'll be talking through what that looks like and how some of those skills can translate from the big, small streams to the big water. So that one's on the 17th, Friday at noon. And then Saturday, 10 a.m., January 18th, is called Advanced Small Stream Tactics. And this one boils down to the idea that pretty much everybody can go out to a small creek, mountain stream, anything like that, and catch fish. How do you catch more fish? How do you catch bigger fish? How do you find fish that no one else has found? So I will walk through that, and that will have components that have gear, approach, techniques, all that sort of stuff will be baked into that. So that's really the bread and butter of casting across, if you are familiar with what I've been doing for any period of time. So it's going to be great to do that in that setting. I've really enjoyed the fly fishing show. I've been involved in one way or another for a number of years through casting across, but this is going to be fun to actually present. So if you are in New England and you plan on coming to the show, then it would be great if you were to come to these presentations again, Friday at noon, Saturday at 10 a.m., January 17th and 18th in Marlborough, Massachusetts. More information, of course, at the Fly Fishing Show's website, but also pinned to the top of castingacross.com. I'm sure I'll talk about it again in the month leading up to the presentations and the fly fishing show. Well, what I have done a handful of times over the years when it comes to this Christmas episode is go to the well of the public domain. What's the public domain? Well, it is content that has been around long enough that anybody and everybody can use it without having to pay royalty fees and without the algorithm flagging it as being bad. Since that's the last thing that I would want to do, be bad and take someone's credit for something that they've done, this is a great way to introduce you to the deep, deep well that is old angling literature. Some of these things are obscure. Some of the ones I've done in the past, I've just tried to scroll down as far as I could and find something new and different. This one is actually a book I've seen before, and I'm actually familiar with the author, Harold Hinsdale Smedley. We have another child coming, so maybe that's a name worth exploring. Harold Hinsdale Smedley. He wrote a book called Trout of Michigan, and I've seen that before in one way or another. But this book is called Fly Patterns and Their Origins. This is the second printing, and it was in 1944. But this is a great little book. I have not seen this one physically, but like I said, I've seen his Trout of Michigan physically, probably in a used bookstore. But this is a great little book that, I'm sure you could dispute some historical record of it, but at the same time, it does give you a general sense on where some of the most famous flies came from, which I think is a really cool thing. I'll be talking about another book that essentially does the same thing, only it's brand new, sometime in the next couple of months. But what this book does is it gives you, I don't even know how many flies. There's at least 3 pages of table of contents. Each one has probably about 40. So there's over 100 flies, and it gives a brief, sometimes really brief, sometimes a little bit longer explanation of where this fly came from. So let's dive right in with the atoms. So this is what Smedley writes. Leonard Halliday of Mayfield, Michigan, was the first to tie this truly Michigan's favorite fly, which was named for Charles F. Adams, an attorney of Lorain, Ohio. As Halliday himself tells it, the first Adams I made I handed to Mr. Adams, who was fishing in a small pond in front of my house, try on the Borden that evening. When he came back next morning, he wanted to know what I called it. He said it was a knockout, and I said we would call it the Adams, since he had made the first good catch on it. As is always true with any popular fly, it developed variations and is now found in a missus as well as a blue wing pattern. It's easy to see how some flies attain wide and lasting popularity. They simply combine the salient features of a number of more prevalent naturals. The Adams combines what I personally regard as the 2 basic colors of flies, brown and gray, and the modeling blends the 2 colors in a most natural way. The rough body is a more attractive type, or rather a type more often attractive than quill, silk, or metal. The wide wings suggest the spent fly, and also the attention-getting loom of the fan wing that will stand up much better under use. Also, the fly is saved from complete invisibility by the barred wings. The christening of the Adams took place in about 1922. Leonard Halliday, born in 1872, has spent the last 60 of his 70 years living near the Boardman River. All his life a fisherman, Len says, I've been tying flies since 1917. I haven't caught a fish on a baited hook for the last 35 years. I use only the fly. C.F. Adams, who has a summer home on Arbutus Lake, is an ardent trout fisherman whose favorite waters are the Boardman, which he has fished regularly for 25 years. Lou B. Adams, son of Charles F. Adams, says, Since Dad and I do practically all our fishing together, and have both used this particular fly ever since it was originated, we have noticed that although it is at times a steady fish getter, it seems to be especially effective if there are flying ants on the stream, and we have both thought it is the bug that it apparently stimulates. Len Halliday also stated, When I read your Trout of Michigan, it reminded me of old times, for I was here when the grayling were in the Boardman. When I started there, about 55 brook trout and grayling. The Hairstone is another of Halliday's patterns. So this is essentially what is in this book, and it goes over and over with a number of different patterns. And so I figured I would share a handful with you today for this episode of the podcast. Coachman. George IV, King of England, died in 1830. His successor, William IV, died in 1837 and was succeeded by Queen Victoria. Tom Bosworth, who served all three as coachman to the royal family, was originator of the coachman fly, hence the name. It has a bronze-green peacock herl body, brown hackle, and white wings. In other words, it is a brown hackle with white wings. T.C. Hoffland, see Hoffland's Fancy, in his Angler's Manual, 1839, described it as body, copper-colored peacock herl, legs, red hackle, wings, landrail. Edward Fitzgibbon, writing under the name of Ephemera in his A Handbook of Angling in 1847, described the coachman: body, peacock's herl, full and short, wings, fibers of any small white feather, legs, a turn or two of red hackle. He listed it as a fly for use on May evenings. G.P.R. Pullman of London, writing in 1850, described the fly as body, peacock herl, legs, a red hen's hackle, wings from the white part of feather from a magpie's wing. A red hen's hackle is really brown. Since that early day, many variations have appeared. There's a coachman with a red silk tip at the lower end of the body. That pattern was followed by Wakeman Holberton. The gray or lead wing, or as it is sometimes called, the dark coachman, tied with a starling feather substituted for the white wing, is credited to Henry R. Francis, an Englishman of Pennell's time, and author of a chapter in Pennell's book on fly fishing, Salmon and Trout. This fly is a great favorite of Thad Norris. So again, a little editorial by me on this. Notice how the recipes for these flies 150, 200 years ago were. You kind of had to figure out the proportions on your own. And so there was, in one sense, you knew what the proportion of a fly looked like. And then all you got was the instruction to the ingredients, and you knew what it took to look like the fly that it should look like. But oftentimes, you became intrigued by the fly by seeing it instead of dissecting it like a lot of folks do today, to see what's in it, or going online to see what's in it. You just were able to get the recipe and put it together. But I do like how generic and how there's, it needs to be more gray than brown. Something like that is in there as the description. It really is quite interesting, and to think about what they had to do back then, not only to procure the ingredients of these flies, but also to figure out how to put them together. How about this one? Gordon. Theodore Gordon, noted angler author, tyer of the first American dry flies, and creator of the fly that bears his name, was born in Pittsburgh in 1854. He died at Bradley, New York on the Neversink in 1915. The last 35 years of his life were spent on or near the trout streams of Sullivan County. He was an ardent and expert fisherman and a most proficient fly tyer. He is considered the father of dry fly fishing in the United States. He was as well known in England, where he had fished, as in this country, and was a valued contributor to outdoor publications. Mr. Gordon was tying dry flies on eyed hooks in 1888 or earlier. With the exception of the Kuehl brothers of San Francisco, formerly of London, who were making and selling Boynton floating flies as new to the States, Gordon was then only source of such dry flies, except English-made flies in some stores. Mr. Gordon tied his first dry flies from samples and instructions from Halford. He was the first to urge the use of dry flies for salmon, which flies he started tying in 1891. Concerning the dry fly, Gordon in 1909 wrote, "My intention was first seriously engaged. I'm sure, knowing other things I've read about Gordon, that he could have been enraged. Let me start over. My attention was first seriously engaged soon after the publication of E.M. Halford's fine works in England, I think in 1886, but the dry fly has been used successfully at least a quarter of a century earlier. In Thaddeus Norris's American Angler, published in 1860, there was a description of dry fly fishing on the Willamette. Norris, using two flies tied expressly for this occasion and a leader of finest gut, was able to lay them so lightly upon the glossy surface that the trout rose and were hooked before the flies sank." Gordon continues, "The bacilli of the dry fly entered my system about 1889. I imported an English rod, dry flies, and gossamer silk worm gut." For the quill Gordon, he stated the wing should be a single upright bunch of wood duck barbules because the natural holds its wings erect and together when at rest, which indicates a mayfly. Gordon called this fly a blue quill Gordon. Gordon himself referred to his gold-bodied fly as the golden spinner. The body was light peacock quill with a black edge. The hackle was dun or blue, whichever you wish, very light in color, almost transparent, and the color of water. The body was wound with a very fine gold-plated wire. Tails were 3 or 4 wisps from wood duck feathers. Roy Steenrod says, Gordon and I tied very few flies with split wings, making them with the wings straight up over the body. I always tied the quill Gordon with a fine gold wire ribbing, not to give it color, but to make the quill last. And Gordon gave me this wire and said that he used it for the same purpose. Theodore Gordon and I were very friendly, and I made a point to call him twice a week during his last illness. Gordon's nephews gave me all his books and many other things. Steenrod has a set of dry flies given to Gordon by Halford in 1890. Gordon's fly tying materials were divided between Steenrod and Christian. In 1903, Gordon introduced a cork-bodied, feather and bucktail-haired bug. Gordon tied his own dry flies to suit the water and the season. He was a disbeliever in foreign patterns and believed in copying our own natural insects as closely as possible. He carried out his beliefs in his own fly tying. Writing in 1906, Gordon said of hackled flies, "If the size, color of body, and legs are right, they, the trout, do not detect the absence of the upright wings, which are so conspicuous to us." All right, more editorial from Matthew. These last few paragraphs are fantastic. So, first of all, how Gordon, as well as Steenrod, who we'll talk about one of his flies here in a moment, they both agreed that the wire rib is for endurance for the fly, so it holds up rather than anything aesthetic. Remember that, okay? When someone tells you, well, it has to have 5 wraps to stimulate the segments of the body or something like that. All right, I'm pretty sure that Theodore Gordon knew well, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, what did he use? He also used a cork-bodied feather and bucktail-haired bug. It says that he tied his own dry flies to suit the water and the season. I have fished foam and cork-bodied dry flies, and I think they are fantastic. And although they are a little bit more, they are a lot more wind resistant, so a little bit harder to cast. They float incredibly, and so this is not some sort of newfangled closed cell foam, sort of thing. This has been happening for a long, long time. And the third one, I'm going to read it again. If the size, color of body, and legs are right, they, the trout, do not detect the absence of the upright wings, which are so conspicuous to us. I firmly believe that if you tie a fly well, that the wings are more for your benefit, maybe some sort of like cider, than they are for the trouts. I think that if you have the right proportions in a fly of the hackle, body, and tail, then that hook will act as a keel. It's going to float right every time. And if you can see it, then fish it, and don't spend that extra time tying those wings if you don't want to. If you want to, by all means, do it. But I agree with Gordon on this. Next one, Gray Ghost. This is a very short paragraph. This is probably reeks a little bit of a gender bias back in the early part of the 20th century. Some blue-gray feathers from an old hat, some deer hair, some colored sewing silk and tinsel string put together on hook by Mrs. Carrie G. Stevens, wife of Guide Wallace C. Stevens of Upper Dam and the Rangeley Lakes, made up one of the first of the famous main streamer flies, the gray ghost. First fished by Mrs. Stevens, it took a prize-winning trout of almost 7 pounds in the 1924 season. Other streamers of the many tied by Mrs. Stevens are the Water Witch, Greyhound, and a more recent pattern, the Major Bates, named for S.D. Bates Jr. of Springfield, Massachusetts. Now, again, very, very brief paragraph on Carrie Stevens and the Gray Ghost, but there are now a handful of books that are out there that are worth looking at and worth reading that talk more about Stevens and her contributions to fly tying. And if you've ever been up there, it's just awesome, awesome stuff in the Rangeley Lakes region, and her contributions to streamers and fly tying are top-notch. A couple more. Hare's ear. All right, here we go. Ready? Who first tied this pattern, history does not disclose. The name was a, quote, natural for fur from or between the ears of a hare that was used for dubbing the body. In 1839, T.C. Hofland referred to it as hare's ear dun. In Scotland, a hare's ear is usually called a hare lug, lug being the Scotch word for ear. All colors are available, from dingy white to very dark, with some patterns plain and others with gold ribbing. The gold ribbed hare's ear is the most popular. All right, so this was written in, I think, 1920-something. I know this edition is 1944, but what is still our most popular nymph? And get out of here with your Czech and Euro patterns, stuff like that. But the most normal nymph, pheasant tail, hare's ear. Which one is it? But it has lasting power, and it's almost kind of exciting to have a fly that we don't have its full origin story. All right, one more, and then we will call it a wrap. This is a fly I alluded to earlier, the Hendrickson. It was after Albert Everett Hendrickson of Scarsdale, New York, that this fly was named. Of this pattern, Roy Steenrod, mentioned him back with the Gordon, state conservation inspector whose home is in Liberty, New York, says, Theodore Gordon tied flies for A.E. Hendrickson. After Gordon's death in 1915, A.E., as it was that I always called him, wrote to me about the tying of flies for him, and in May 1915 he came to Liberty to see me. He was accompanied by George Stevenson, and from that time until the passing of A.E. we fished together each year. Our fishing trips took place in the Esopus, Neversink, Willowmock, and Beaverkill rivers. It was about this time that the dry fly became popular in the U.S. and on the above rivers. One day in 1916, while we were fishing the Beaverkill below the junction pool at Roscoe, a hatch of flies came on. We had never seen fish rise so freely for any fly as they did for this hatch. I caught one of the flies and put it in my fly box, and after lunch that day at Ferdin's, I tied some patterns of the fly as nearly as I could. We took fish with that fly day in and day out, and for years it proved to be a killer and is so today. One day, while sitting on the bank of the stream, perhaps 2 years after I had tied the first patterns, the matter was brought up as to what I would call or name the fly. Looking at A.E., the best friend a person could ever wish to have, I said, The fly is the Hendrickson. I saw at once that A.E. was pleased. Since that first Hendrickson, several patterns have been put on the market, called the light and dark Hendrickson, but none are tied true to color. The Hendrickson is tied with the tails from the crest of a golden pheasant, the wings, wood duck, body, fawn-colored fur from the belly of a red fox, hackle, dun, almost transparent, or watercolor. The first single-handed detachable butt dry fly salmon rod was made to Mr. Hendrickson's order and specifications by Jim Payne, son of Ed Payne, original founder of the Payne Rod Company and former employee of Hiram L. Leonard. Hendrickson was the first to conceive the idea of it and actually catch baby tarpon on flies, which he did in Panama. Well, there you go. I mean, that stuff's fantastic. In like 3 paragraphs, you have tarpon in Panama, you have the Leonard Rod Company, you have the Payne Rod Company, you have the Hendrickson fly, you have the Junction Pool in Roscoe. It's all right there, and a fly drifts through it. So I will put a link this week in Fly Patterns and Their Origins by Harold Hinsdale Smedley, and the link to that will be in the show notes of this podcast page. I'll come circle back around to that. But this is what you can find in old books. I think this is great. Is it the best? No, but is it good? Absolutely. And so that's my encouragement to you. If you get, if grandma sends you a $5 bill in your Christmas card this year, go to a used bookstore, kick around, see what you can find. I'm very, very confident that if you just look around, you're going to be able to find something fun and worth reading. And so with that, I do want to wish you a Merry Christmas. Again, something that I do not shy away from mentioning this time of year, any time of year, is that, you have to reckon with the fact that there's a reason we celebrate Christmas. You have to reckon with the fact that history changed 2,000 years ago, that whether you use BC and AD or BCE and CE, there is something that happened that was definitional to that change in the way that we think about our history and our time. And that very thing is the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And so I do wish you a Merry Christmas. I do hope that you can have a great time with family, that you can get outdoors, and that you can enjoy, again, the reason for the season. This week on castingacross.com, the first article, something that I already talked about on this podcast, it was called Casting Across at the Fly Fishing Show. This is where you can go to get all the details on the presentations that I mentioned earlier. The next article that came out was called Christmas Angling Traditions. Christmas Angling Traditions. Actually, Christmas Fishing Traditions is what it is. But I touch on 4 things that you can do around the holiday time that you can do year in and year out. And they don't all involve getting on the stream. And one of them involves getting on the stream and not doing a whole lot of fishing. But just a fun little article. Check that out and maybe make your own fishing tradition, or let me know what they are around Christmas time. So once again, this week's recommendation on the podcast is this book that I read from earlier today, Fly Patterns and Their Origins by Harold Hinsdale Smedley. But once you go to this link, then you'll be able to get into books of all shapes and sizes, fiction, nonfiction, all varieties of different interests. And although it's not super fun, in my opinion, to read on a screen, it'll give you a launching pad to go and find more stuff. So you can check out that link at the bottom of this podcast show notes over at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and then rate the podcast on Spotify and on iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.